So your landlord doesn't want to play ball, and now you have to find a subtenant. The good news is that your broker will do the heavy lifting. So for this part of the process, you're in more of a supportive role. I recommend that you do the following. Provide your broker with all requested information. There are some important details that are vital to effective marketing, and you may have to do some research. For example, you'll need to know exactly what you pay each month, not only the rent, but also the building expenses. Sometimes that takes a bit of research, but your broker cannot create an asking price without that info. Set up easy access. Conducting tours is fundamental to garnering interest, and prospective subtenants will often ask to see the space with very little notice. Give your broker a security card or an access badge. I've seen tours get skipped because the broker could not get access to the space. If it's empty, make the space look nice. I've walked into many vacant spaces that look like a bomb went off. Wires are hanging from walls, papers are strewn about, and hallways are blocked by furniture. A prospective subtenant needs to be able to imagine their business operating in your space, and if it looks messy, they'll have trouble doing that. Be accommodating. My point here is that you want this process to move forward smoothly. If you're slow in responding to requests, answering questions, or doing any necessary tasks, then it makes everything slower and more difficult. Subleasing space is a rather arduous process. Do your part to keep things moving forward. It's important to conduct regular meetings or phone calls with your brokerage team. Depending on the importance of the project, I think once every 2 weeks is about right. You need to remain up to speed on how things are going. Make sure you discuss any prospective subtenants. Ask how many inquiries were received, how many tours were conducted. More importantly, find out what people are saying about the space. Why didn't they make an offer? Is it too big, overpriced, bad layout? If you're hearing certain complaints repeatedly, then you should consider making changes. For example, if most tenants say it's too big, offer to break it up and do several smaller subleases. If they hate the layout, then look at changing it. It's expensive, but if it will make the difference, then it's worthwhile. Even if you're not getting negative feedback, if the space isn't moving, then be proactive and try some incentives. For example, lower the price or offer a bonus commission for a limited time. Just for clarity, the bonus commission is not for your broker, it's for the other brokers who might represent a subtenant. The idea is that it might incentivize them to show your space to their clients. The key point here is don't get stuck waiting and hoping that things will work out. Sublease space can languish on the market for many months, even years in some cases. Do what's necessary to get a deal done. Respond quickly to proposals. Sometimes this is challenging because you may need certain approvals or want to conduct analysis. I'm not suggesting that you skip any of that because you shouldn't. But keep this in mind. There's an axiom in commercial real estate, which is time kills all deals. The slower you are at moving the process forward, the less likely it is that you will make a deal. Which leads me to my next point. You will probably need to manage up. That means getting cooperation from your superiors. You may need their approval for many of these decisions, and it's possible they won't understand the importance of everything I just described. If you're not getting what you need, or if they're slowing the process down, then take action. Explain the risks and engage in polite persistence. Make sure you're getting the cooperation you need to get the job done. At this point, you've marketed your space effectively and you've received an offer. Now what? Well, it depends. You essentially have 2 ways you can make a deal. You can either work out agreeable terms with your subtenant, or you can attempt a lease termination with your landlord, thereby making your subtenant the landlord's new direct tenant. Let's call the first scenario a straight sublease. Drawing on our previous example, the graph shown here depicts your 5-year lease. As you'll recall, you started marketing this space after 2.5 years, and you now have a subtenant who wants to occupy your space at the beginning of year 4. That means that for the final 2 years of your lease, you will receive rent from the subtenant, and you'll continue paying your landlord what's stated in your original lease. As you'll recall, you're paying the landlord $60 per square foot per year, and the subtenant will pay you $45 per square foot per year. You will have to make up the shortfall, which means you will lose money, but it will be a lot less than what you would lose on an empty space. A quick side note, there is also the possibility you could do an assignment if your prospective subtenant is willing to take over your current lease without any changes. In that case, you're no longer the middleman, and and the subtenant is not actually a subtenant because they deal directly with the landlord. However, this does not remove your liability because you're still a guarantor of the lease. If for some reason the new tenant defaults, then the landlord can force you to cure the default. There is a way to be absolved of any liability when you do an assignment, which is called a novation, but they're extremely rare. Assignments are also quite rare simply because it's difficult to find a tenant who will agree to the exact terms in your lease, most notably because your rent will likely be higher than what they would pay you for a sublease. Your other option after you receive an offer is to negotiate a lease termination with the landlord. The most common scenario is that the new tenant wants a longer term than you can offer. For example, the new tenant might desire a 5-year term, but you can only offer the 2 years that remain on your lease. This graph shows your original 5-year lease plus the additional 3 years the new tenant is seeking. It's possible they could simultaneously sign a sublease with you and a direct lease with the landlord for those additional 3 years. However, it's much simpler to have the landlord tear up your lease and sign a 5-year deal with the new tenant, shown here. This is exactly what you should propose to the landlord. However, unlike the termination proposal back when you started marketing the space, this time you're offering less money because now you have something the landlord wants, a new tenant seeking a long-term lease. The new tenant can't lease the space without your cooperation. Therefore, you have leverage. You can use that leverage to convince the landlord to terminate your lease in exchange for this new tenant. Now let's assume the landlord agrees and is ready to terminate your lease and sign a 5-year deal with the new tenant. There's one more wrinkle that needs to be ironed out. The new tenant might say, hold on a second. I was only going to pay $45 per square foot for years 1 and 2 because it was a sublease. Now I have to pay $60 a square foot because it's a direct deal with the landlord. Not fair. Well, that's true. And as you can see here, that difference would be $1.2 million. There are generally 2 solutions to this problem, and both involve you writing a check. One way is that you make the new tenant whole by paying them the difference in a lump sum. Another, more common way is that you subsidize the new tenant's rent by writing that check to the landlord, and the landlord then agrees to lease the space at $45 per square foot during those first 2 years. Writing a check for $1.2 million may sound like a lot, but you were going to lose that much anyway if you did the sublease, and now you're much better off because the lease is completely off your books and you're not stuck playing landlord to a subtenant. You can probably tell that there are endless scenarios that can play out depending on the proposals you receive. What I've outlined here are the 2 basic structures to make a deal. If there's one thing I want you to remember, it's that when you find a new tenant, you then have leverage with the landlord, and so you're in a better position to negotiate a lease termination. The amount of that leverage depends on how good the deal is for the landlord, which is generally governed by 2 things: the financial strength of the new tenant and the length of the desired lease. If you find a Fortune 500 company looking for a 10-year lease, then you have tremendous leverage. If you find a startup company looking for a 3-year lease, then you have very little. Whatever leverage you do have, use it to your advantage to make the best deal possible for your company.